Don't kid yourself. We're headed for a civil war. Now, this civil war is political in nature. There is clearly a political divide in the United States, and indeed in the Western democracies, between what you could call progressivism and everybody else. Now, the fact of the matter is, progressivism is really an ideology that is utopian in nature. And this ideology basically states that those who believe in it are the good people, and everybody else, anybody else, who does not agree with them and who opposes them, well, they're evil, and they must be stopped by any means necessary. It's that concept, by any means necessary, that makes the whole situation just, oh man, it's gonna get fucking ugly. I'll tell you that right the fuck now. See, by any means necessary, you're basically saying that if you can't convince people to be on your side, then you have to kill them. Yeah. You have to bring them to your side by force, if need be. That's what by any means necessary ultimately means. You see, since the American Civil War, in a democracy, what happens? Well, there is the belief, the implied belief, that both sides have fair positions and that they have legitimate grievances and legitimate ambitions. And the other side implicitly respects those objectives, those grievances, and tries to work with them, and arrive at a compromise. That's the whole notion of a democracy. A democracy is all about compromise. But if you believe in by any means necessary, then there is no such thing as compromise. Of course not. And in point of fact, compromise is a dirty word to people who believe by any means necessary. By any means necessary means that the objectives that you have, the goals, the political objectives that you have, are moral imperatives. By any means necessary is opening the door to do anything that is necessary to achieve those political goals. And so, by definition, anybody who opposes you is evil and must be destroyed. This is how democracy dies, when a substantial faction of a country believes that their political objectives are moral imperatives, and anybody who opposes them or disagrees with them or has other objectives, they are evil. The progressives are intolerant of anybody else who disagrees with them, intolerant of anybody else who has different political objectives, and so it is only a matter of time before this minority of progressives, who are numerically quite substantial, it's only a matter of time before they explode across the landscape and plunge the Western democracies into civil war. So it's not really an issue of if there will be a civil war. The issue is really, when will there be a civil war? Now, history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as shit rhymes. And it rhymes quite strongly, as a matter of fact. Almost like a child's lullaby, okay? If you look at the period before the American Civil War, you will see more or less what is happening today. You will see basically two factions, because post hoc people talk about the American Civil War as if it were about slavery. It wasn't about slavery. It was not. It was after the fact that people imposed the narrative that it was about slavery. But before the Civil War and during the Civil War, it was about two opposing beliefs about what the United States ought to be. On the one hand, there were the Federalists. They were people who wanted a strong central federal authority who would rule over the states. And on the other hand, you had states' rights advocates who wanted each state to be a sovereign nation confederated into the United States of America, as opposed to being provinces of an overarching federal authority. That was the reason of the Civil War from 1861 to 1865. But the Civil War didn't happen overnight. Oh no. It took 40 years for it to happen, for the Civil War to break out. You had elements of what would become the arguments of the Civil War happening in the 1820s and the 1830s. And I'm not talking about the issue of states that were slaves, that had slavery, and those that did not. I'm talking about states that opposed centralized federal authority and then did their utmost to resist that centralization, that federalization. You had these problems happening from the 1820s. Andrew Jackson was the real start of the American Civil War, and he happened, 35, 40 years before the Civil War broke out. If I am contrasting the current period that we are living in with the period, 1812 to 1861, and the progression of the political divide that eventually led to the Civil War, I'd say that we're somewhere in the late 1840s, early 1850s. We're still a few years away from open warfare, but it's coming closer and closer and closer. Now, of course, I could be wrong, but then again, I could be right. So if I'm wrong, I'm an idiot. But if I'm right, well, then it's something to consider, isn't it? If there's going to be open civil strife in the Western democracies, principally in the United States, but also in the continent of Europe, the question becomes, how do you prepare for such a thing? How do you husband your resources and prepare both yourself and your family and your business and the people around you? How do you get ready for such an event, such an unpredictable event, such an event that is both unpredictable and explosive and incredibly destructive? Because all civil wars, by definition, are the ugliest wars. They're the nastiest wars, because ultimately the worst fights are always between brothers. I've given it a lot of thought as to what to do when civil war breaks out. A lot of thought. Not obsessive thought, I think not, but I've given it a lot of thought. And, and I've looked at other people who have given it some thought too. Principally these guys, the preppers, right? The preppers, these guys who are preparing for the apocalypse and so forth. And I have the following thoughts. Number one, and you're going to have to forgive me if you're a prepper, but I think that preppers are stupid. Preppers are fucking morons, okay? Because what do preppers like to do? What they like to do is think that their homestead is going to be invaded by, extraneous people from here, there, everywhere. Blacks or migrants from Latin America or who knows who are going to attack them. And that's a foolish notion. That's not how a civil war is going to break out. It's not going to be that these random strangers are attacking your home. And so to fortify your home and to build like a panic room and load it up with 10 years worth of rice or some shit like that, and load it up, stock it up with all the weapons that you can lay your hands on, I think it's a recipe for disaster, personally. And let me explain why. See, if you create for yourself a fortification, a stockpile of food and guns and all the rest, number one, you become an incredible target, because people talk, and people are going to find out what you're up to, okay? It's a natural state of affairs. And so, of course, if you have a stockpile of food and supplies and equipment and armaments, especially armaments, people are going to know about it before the outbreak of the hostilities, if you will. And so if hostilities break out, your homestead, your fortification, your panic room or safe house or whatever the fuck you want to call it, the one that you spend so much time preparing, well, it's going to be target number one on the first day that hostilities break out. And the opposing force, whoever they are, they're going to go looking for you. Yeah, because you have all these weapons. And so they're going to want to grab those weapons for two reasons. Number one, they're going to be afraid of you using them. And number two, they're going to want to use them themselves. Yeah. And of course, they're going to outnumber you. They're going to outnumber you by definition, because they'll know that you're armed to the teeth. And so you will be fucked if that's your escape plan, if that's your method for fighting the Civil War. That's why I think preppers are wrong. And then again, there's something else about my personality. See, I'm all about flexibility, movement, agility. See, have you ever noticed that when you're traveling with a whole shitload of shit, a whole boatload of baggage and this, that, the other, knickknacks and what have you, if you hold on to all of these possessions, you're weighed down, you're bogged down. There was this Turkish wrestler in the late 1800s, early 1900s, I forget when exactly. This Turkish wrestler, right, he would convert all of his winnings into gold, and he would put the gold on his belly, around his belly in a belt, right? And he was on some ship, and the ship sank. And he was able to free himself of the ship, and he's trying to swim, but the gold weighed him down so much that he sank to the bottom of the ocean and died. That's what I'm terrified of. Yeah, fuck yeah. I'm terrified of being weighed down by the things that I hold dearest. I'm talking about material, of course. Being weighed down by material possessions, by equipment, gear, preparations, what have you. Fuck that. If you travel light, with just, a couple of clothes on your back and, just a switchblade, hidden in your boot, right? You can go here, there, everywhere. Now, of course, I'm speaking metaphorically here, but think of the panoply of your life. If you travel light, if you travel flexible, and you don't attach yourself to any one place, but adapt constantly to the changing environment and recognize that a place that might be safe right now will not be safe in the future, and a place that is obscure today might be the place that you want to be tomorrow. Well, if you think that way, then you are constantly on the go, on the move. Now, this is difficult for a lot of people because most people like to stay put in one place. It's a natural human tendency. People like to stay in one place and not move. They want to settle. It's the human thing. Have you noticed that whenever people arrive at any place, in short order, they start to do little homey touches and they're like spread out their stuff and what have you. When they feel secure, you ever been at an airport, for instance, and the flight got delayed, there's some problem with the airplane, and so you're stuck there at the airport in the waiting lounge, and soon enough people start to settle. They spread their stuff all over. It is the natural human instinct, and you have to resist it. Yeah, if you recognize that things are going south, you don't want to spread out and settle in. You want to have a little backpack on your back, the loved ones firmly by the hand beside you, and you got to be willing to go as quickly as possible. Yeah, you got to be willing to go from a place that is safe right now to some other place, because the place that you're safe now might not be safe tomorrow. That's how you have to be thinking. Now, this is, of course, presupposing that you decide not to engage in the Civil War. This is supposing that you are a bystander to the events that are happening. Now, if you decide to choose sides, well, that's a whole different kettle of fish now, isn't it? See, the Civil War is going to be to the death. Oh, yeah. Just like the American Civil War in 1861 to 1865. That Civil War was to the death. Tens of thousands of men died. There were towns, both the North and the South, where there were simply no eligible men for marriage. There were tons of war widows, of young women who never found a mate, because all the young men of their towns were killed in the war. Yeah. Because like I said before, civil wars are the most vicious wars. And this war that's coming up, there is an ingrained hatred on both sides for each other. There is the notion on the progressive side that everybody who opposes them is evil, right? But on the other hand, there is a sense on the right of legitimate grievance, of being abused, of being belittled, of their interests, their priorities, the things that they hold dear and valuable, being spit upon by the progressives. When the Civil War breaks out, there are going to be no neutral sides. When the Civil War breaks out, if you are politically minded, you're going to have to choose a side. And sometimes each of those sides is going to show a very distasteful side, a very distasteful face. But you're going to have to embrace that no matter how distasteful you might find it. Because see, this is going to be to the death. And I don't think that the people on the right will necessarily win. There's the whole shibboleth that the people on the right are going to win because they've got the guns. No, not necessarily. Because I'm a man of the right, and I can tell you right now, we conservatives tend to be very, very slow to anger. And a lot of times, though we tend to believe that we are rational and very cautious and realistic, sometimes we are caught flat-footed by the insanity that befalls us. I studied the Russian Civil War. The Russian Civil War and Russian history and the Russian Revolution. right? That's what I wrote my thesis on. I know it quite intimately. And what's shocking is how many Russian patricians, Russian oligarchs, Russian noblemen and women, they could not believe what was happening. They couldn't believe it. They had all the opportunities to run, to flee with their riches and escape the Bolsheviks. But they could not believe what the Bolsheviks wound up doing. They couldn't make sense of it. They had never, it's not only that they had never experienced anything like it and nobody had ever experienced anything like it, it's that they could not believe the reality that was befalling them, even as it was happening to them. They did not resist. They were passive as Hindu cows. They were sure that things would sort of like magically work themselves out. And that's the problem with conservatives. We always tend to think that things will somehow magically work themselves out. We always tend to think that things can't get that bad. We always tend to think that the other guy, our enemy, our opposition, is not the evil bastard that they turn out to actually be. You saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's idiotic Green New Deal, right? You saw that. I mean, incredibly stupid. I mean, just completely impractical and fucking insane, right? But here's the thing, see, it's a mistake to think that the people who espouse the Green New Deal weren't serious about it. They were dead serious about it. They believe that shit. Insane as it is, they believe it. And if they have the weapons and the political power and the military behind them to implement such an insane scheme of basically prohibiting air travel, right, and forcing everybody to rebuild all their buildings so that they're green, if you think that they wouldn't do it if they had the political power and the military might to do it, then you're a fool. They want to do it. They are telling you that they want to do it. They will. When the shit goes down, people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, well, we're going to look back on them fondly as the moderates of the crazies on the progressive side. Have I scared you? I hope I have. Fuck yeah! Because that's where we're headed. And like I said before, I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know what's going to be the trigger for it. But look at what's happening with the yellow vests in France. They're going on 20 weeks of demonstrations. And there's still no end in sight. There's no negotiation or anything like that. The people feel abused. And it's because of a combination of factors. And then it's beyond the scope of this particular video. But I just want you to leave with the idea of a civil war happening and what you're going to do about it. And you should be thinking about it now. Thinking about it sensibly. Not stupid, prepper shit, I'm going to fortify myself and get a bunch of shotguns and protect my homestead when the crazies come. No, that's dumb. That's dumb, and you're setting yourself up to be a sitting duck. No, that's not the way to think about this problem. But what you have to do is be thinking about this problem now while you can, and you have to be thinking about those Russian princes at the beginning of the 20th century. They were rich, they were educated, they had political connections, they had everything going for them. And they were destroyed. An entire class of people, they were liquidated, that is, murdered, and sometimes horrifically murdered by the Bolsheviks. It has happened. And to think that it cannot happen in the Western democracies, it's just the typical blindness of conservatives. Don't fall for that trap. Look at the world. Look at what is happening. And ask yourself the following question. Why am I, Coach Red Pill, a guy who could live anywhere on the planet, why am I in this obscure corner of Ukraine? It's gonna happen. I call this video if and when, but it's really when. It's gonna happen. So be smart. Be thinking about this problem now, because later you won't have the time.